Good evening, welcome. My name is Peter Loge. I'm the Director of the School of Media and Public Affairs. All of you here know what SMPA is. Some of you online may not. We're the nation's leading place to study political communication and journalism for undergraduates and one of the top programs for graduate study of strategic communication. We're home to 400 undergraduate majors, half of whom are studying journalism, half of whom are studying political communication. About 150 people are minoring in journalism. They're supported by 25 full-time faculty, just about as many part-time faculty in any given semester, half a dozen centers, projects, and institutes, 3 fellows, half a dozen full and part-time staff, an outside advisory council, and obviously a television studio and a podcasting studio. We think it's a pretty cool place to be. And I'm excited that this is the first of the fall series of events we're co-sponsoring with Campaigns and Elections, our second year of doing this. Campaigns and Elections is the nation's leading place for political campaign professionals. The online information, the newsletters, the email updates, and the conferences are really indispensable for anybody working in political communication. And I'm thrilled to continue the series with C&E and continue our partnership with C&E. Which brings us to tonight's conversation. Tonight we're going to be talking about getting out the vote in 2024. All of us are drowning in email and direct mail and texts and over-the-air ads and every other way of reaching voters. The question is, how do you turn all of that noise, all of that attention, all of that persuasion into somebody actually casting a ballot, putting a ballot in the mail or showing up on election day? And so to talk about that, I'm really excited to have 3 people who see this from different angles and are experts in it in different ways. And as always, we have a Republican consultant, a Democratic consultant, and a student. You can go to an interesting conversation any night of the week in Washington, D.C. and hear smart people talk about interesting things. What Brookings and CSIS and the rest don't have that we do is SMPA students. The smartest, sharpest, most focused undergraduates I've ever met, I've ever worked with, add something to the conversation that you simply can't get anywhere else. So I'm really thrilled that you're with us. So our first, I'll introduce them in order and then we'll just start the conversation. This is Camille Murray. She's a third-year student here at GW, majoring in political communication, minoring in Arabic. Originally from Potsdam, the Philadelphia suburbs, passionate about political issues, as you would expect from a political communication major here at SMPA. We had a prep call yesterday with a panel, and I think it was Tad asked, are you interning? She said, no, I'm taking this semester off, because so far it's been exhausting. Over the summer, you were at Emily's List, and last spring with your hometown Representative Dean, working up on the Hill. Next to her is Marielle Sayes, Executive Vice President at SKDK, one of the nation's leading, probably the nation's leading democratic messaging firms. More than a decade of experience in government and politics. I'm just reading what's in front of me, so go with it. She's part of President Biden's White House communications team, where she's Director of Broadcast Media, acted as the administration's point person for over 2,700 interviews in the first year of the Biden presidency. Also spent more than a decade on the Hill working for House Majority Leader Steny Hoyer, and has had a number of other roles in Mr. Hoyer's office. At the far left, which is somewhat ironic given the politics of all of this, is Ted Rupp, partner at Targeted Victory, a major player in digital fundraising, political marketing, and advocacy on the right. He oversees the agency's third-person outside groups team and worked with PACs and independent expenditures. Also assisted his colleague Ryan Mearstein with GW's graduate school political management course on digital advertising and advocacy. Before going to consulting, he was a legislative director on the Hill and served on campaigns and field programs around the country. And this is my favorite part of his bio. He met his wife on a Get Out the Vote phone bank. And you now have 2 kids. Which, this is the only group I know of in America that think, oh, GOTV. That's really, love that about all of you. So,
that's great.
We're all drowning in messaging, right? I mean, my phone is sitting in the control and buzzing with, getting texts saying, if you don't give $4 to the DCCC, we'll shoot this dog or something. The challenge, though, is turning all of that into actually getting people to the polls. So I want to talk about this in a couple of different ways. The first question is GOTV different in 2024 than it was when you and your now wife were, moon eyes over phone banking? Sure. Is it different now in 2024? Has it changed?
Yeah, very different. And I think, I just to level set this conversation, I can't think of a better time for you guys to be coming up. And I think this cycle has clearly been odd at times. It's been very scary, but I think I'm super positive, and all the GeoTV opportunities and how much everything is changing for the good. I think when I look back, you know, the holy grail for my generation was the 2004 Bush Cheney race, where they used micro-targeting for the first time at scale, and they opened up all these local victory offices, and that's really what trained a generation. But at the end of the day, all we were doing was monitoring volunteer calls and maybe pulling a list. What you guys are able to do now with all the different types of content that is needed in order to reach and be optimized in every single channels, all the different groups and the things that we're going to talk about, it's very exciting and allows anybody with a phone to be an organizer and to be a content creator. You know, back then it was like the mail guys and the TV guys were the ones that were driving a message, and so I think it's super exciting. It's very, very important, and it's a really, really good time for you guys to be coming up.
So how is it different now? I mean, it's great that it's exciting, but why? What makes 24 different?
So I think you have far more distribution channels now than you can ever think of. So I think that just from a media consumption and just how much time has changed, where really I think when we looked at voter turnout and programs, we were just trying to call someone or get to their door to send them out. Now you have to be on 10 different channels with 10 different ad types, and constantly. I think there was, you know, when I started, there were 2 GeoTV audiences. There was sort of the first one, and when you got through that, you went through the second one. Now I think both of our sides are probably slicing and dicing 100 different ways, and so it is very different.
What do you think? Is it a similar experience?
Absolutely. I think, you know, politics right now is in this cycle, and I think it's true of the last cycle, but even more now, you have more technology to bring to bear, and you can make it more inclusive. There are more ways to reach and engage one another. And so, you know, you think about, yes, there's the TV ad making that our firms are involved in very proudly, but you're also thinking creatively about how we are leveraging new technology like texting, changing the way that we fundraise and organize, or bringing influencers into the fold, right? The Democratic National Convention, in addition to building a really modern, inclusive surrogate booking operation I was proud to lead, also credentialed 200 creators, which was unheard of before, but it brought so many more people into the fold in terms of reaching them where they are and engaging them, and just really thinking creatively about how we can bring more people into politics at a time where understandably, people are feeling a little disaffected. So I think the campaigns are really working hard to leverage every tool at our disposal and all this new technology to really bring more people into the fold and engage more folks with careers, in addition to turning out voters.
So they're talking about you, the new voters, engaging the young voters. When we talked yesterday, you said that you went home over Labor Day, and that's when you really understood how the campaigns were happening. Because we don't see that many ads in DC, but you said your mom's drowning in the stuff these nice people are producing.
Yes, that's certainly correct. For context, I'm from Pennsylvania, a hot swing state, and as expected, there are bombardments of ads, text messages, mailers, you name it, it's there. And as I can say, as a student, as a young person, this summer has been so exciting for us as young people trying to get out a vote. We've seen influencers at the DNC. That's never been heard of before, probably now. And it's so interesting to see just the evolution of what has happened from what I remember briefly, 2008, to now. And like Tad said, it's so exciting right now to be a voter, a first-time voter, as I am in the presidential election. And
so you're gonna vote, right? You're here,
correct.
you're a polycom major. Mm-hmm. Even if you weren't gonna vote, you'd lie to the director of SMPA and say, of course I'm gonna vote. But some of your classmates from high school who go to Penn or other schools, what's gonna get them? What's gonna get them to see through the clutter, or to not tune out and to actually show up and cast a ballot?
I think seeing what this election means, what's at stake for them as young people, as young Black people, as young people of color, as young Hispanic people, as young undocumented people, as young LGBTQ+ people, as they see what's at stake with those rights in voting, and I think that's going to come and push them out to vote in this election.
So that actually now speaks, Tad, to what you're talking about at the beginning is, I mean, I'm even older than you are, and it was like you run to the polls and you rip voter rolls and you knock on people's doors. You haven't voted yet, you know, like knock and drag was the term of art. But now we're at a point where you can look at micro-targeting communities. What are you doing to find the pockets of voters, compiling the data, and getting her classmates who may want to vote Republican, but you know, you've got to persuade them to come out and do it?
I mean, I do think it is, from looking at data, the idea that we know who lowered propensity turnout voters are. I think that's super important, and they're not. They are very different, and I think understanding different messages are going to move different people. And I think to bring it back to what we were talking at the beginning, where there used to just be one broadcast message or one GOTV message, you're like, this is going to be our mobilization message. But the ability to sort of drill down, and I think that the second more important part of that is that they're authentic, and they actually, you know, I think instead of just speaking at people, the idea that through text messaging and door knocking and social media, you're actually seeing what responses are, and that should be fine-tuning your message so you're able to turn out your friends to what matters to them. That's exciting, and that's why you need more people, and this is such a bigger enterprise than it's been in any other cycle.
So, Mariela, one thing I hear on the left is young voters are actually demobilized, you know, because nothing's going to change, this is ridiculous. Like, there's more excitement behind Harris than there was behind Biden. How do you convince her classmates who aren't lucky enough to come here that it does matter, that they should come out and vote?
Yeah, I think it's all about turning enthusiasm into action. And there's, you know, two key phases that we're looking at here when we talk about engaging voters. There's the persuasion effort, which is still underway, right? You have 2 new candidates at the top of the ticket. We need to educate voters about their record, their vision for the future. That's why you're seeing them engage on a nationwide, you know, battleground state tour called the New Way Forward Bus Tour, so that they can lay out that affirmative vision and, you know, engage surrogates all across the country as validators and messengers to reach communities about why they're the right choice for our country. In addition to that, to your point, we are absolutely still engaging people to be, especially young people, to be committed voters. So we have that persuasion effort that's underway. And I think we'll see in the coming days and weeks, as early voting continues to ramp up, a real effort to switch into an actionable phase where we're really injecting energy and enthusiasm into turning out at the polls and really laying out for people that it's easy, that there are multiple ways to do it. And I think the pandemic opened up opened up the eyes of so many people to vote by mail, by early voting, and there's more awareness around it now, but really laying out for them clearly what's at stake, the urgency to turn out and make their voice heard, and then really laying out how easy it is for them to make a plan to vote, to register, to go out, and to take their friends and family.
So I want to come back to early voting, but before we do that, I want to come to something that both of you have said and that I've heard a little bit from you as well, which is we can now do micro-targeting. You look at influencers, you're talking about the much bigger field operations. Who do your classmates have to hear from to actually show up at the polls? Is it, I mean, it's great there are influencers, and we can come back to that, but who do they need to hear from?
That's a good question. I think, at least people my age, I believe they need to hear from the candidates themselves. People are saying, as you said, these 2 new candidates have sprung onto the scene. People are saying, oh, I don't know much about Kamala Harris. I don't know much about Tim Walz. You will know about Tim Walz if you're scrolling on TikTok. You will know about Kamala Harris when you see a Harris TikTok pop up on your For You page, or an ad on X, or even on Instagram and Snapchat. You will see it. So I think the candidates themselves, with these ads or ads done with PACs or with different organizations representing a side, you have to hear from them, because influencers can only take you as far as they want you to, but I think hearing from the candidates themselves or from an ad from their party will, I believe, turn people out.
But they can't talk to everybody. There's just too many doors to knock on. And you said your mom is she has no shortage of messages from the candidates. So is it somebody from the neighborhood? Is it somebody not? Is it a canvasser like the old school, or what would it take? And again, not to persuade, but to say, look, it's activating the voter, turning it into action, enthusiasm into action.
Yeah. So I believe canvassing is a effective technique. For example, when I canvassed for the 2022 midterms in a district in Pennsylvania by the nation's capital, Harrisburg, I did canvass. We went to a low-income housing, Section 8 housing. We talked to the potential voters. Do you have a plan? And they were at the door saying, you know what, I didn't have a plan, but thank you so much for coming, and let's make a plan together. Or I didn't think about my plan because I have a disabled daughter. I have to wheel her to the voting center, but now I am thinking about that in the back of my head. Maybe my polling place doesn't have a ramp, or it's not accessible. And so I do think canvassing is, especially when you're reaching, people who don't pay attention to these candidates or to the news 24/7 like these SMPA students do. And so I think definitely canvassing to low information voters is an effective way.
Is that what you've been talking about with when you're using data to slice and dice?
Yeah, and I think even to put it into perspective of you guys, it's, you came out in the rain today, right? Because you literally are the bubble. You are sort of that core. We know you're going to show up. And the good part about GOTV, and I think to answer your question, it's all of the above. Because really what you're talking about is if there are 2 empty chairs on the back, can you grab one more person? And so it may be a celebrity. I mean, I think it is in one way, in the sense of, I think the Taylor Swift Instagram, and I think on our side we worked with a campaign where Dave Portnoy from Barstool, because you are reaching someone that may not be showing up. But at the same time, it may also just be a local neighbor who grabs you at the right time and says, this is it. And that is what's fun about GOTV, is it's literally a numbers game. And it's also, we're just trying to get people to show up, right? And it's almost like we're inviting people to a party that they may or may not be excited to come to. And so it is a number game, and try to get a lot of different bites at the apple. But there is no secret sauce. I think it's just trying to remind people. I think making a plan is a huge part of that.
So it sounds like to me then, some of the techniques might be new, but fundamentally it's old school. Neighbors talking to neighbors, knocking on doors. So let's talk about some of the new school, old school stuff. I've heard you talk about first-time influencers. Of course, it's the first time influencers were at a convention. It's the first time we've had them, right? But in 2004, there were bloggers at the Democratic National Convention. And radio is a new thing, and they've always had celebrities. Are the influencers just kind of the tech of the moment? What really matters is you've got to get the attention, got to get the enthusiasm, then somebody says, make a plan. Is that what's going on?
So I would suggest that it's really about leveraging all of those various tools and all your new technology in a way that's really comprehensive. So let's take, I mentioned the surrogate booking operation for the convention. You had some of these pieces operating in silos. And so what we're really challenging ourselves to do is think about how can we build an inclusive operation that looks at all the surrogates we have across the board and determine where are they going to resonate best. And then look at all of the media platforms. We have national TV and radio. We have battleground state and radio. You have Spanish language TV, Black media, women's media, and you have the digital, creator piece to it. And thinking holistically about how are we reaching a voter. So let's say Camille is watching the DNC, right? And she wakes up in the morning. She wakes up in the morning and she, turns on the TV to check the weather, and she sees a surrogate show up there talking about, being a delegate at the convention. And then she goes to class. At lunchtime, she opens up TikTok and she sees an influencer she's been following for years be at the convention doing a get ready with me video, but talking about the excitement and enthusiasm of being there in the moment. And then she, might open up the Griot on her computer later in the afternoon and see one of the major Black celebrities like Kerry Washington do an interview. Excellent, good choice for me then. Okay.
Well done. Well
and
done.
so we're really creating a surround sound, and we're trying to reach young people, people of color, voters who maybe still are on the fence about being committed to making a plan to vote, we're reaching them in multiple ways where they're already showing up, right? As opposed to just inundating folks with one medium and hoping that they open it up. So,
and then on day of, you still got to go to the polls.
Exactly.
Let's talk about the different kinds of the voting piece. We talked about a little bit of early voting. It's become a bigger deal, obviously, because in 2020, early voting exploded. Early voting also changes GOTV, right? So talk about how the early voting, what that does for get out the vote.
Yeah, I think it's a huge game changer. And, going back to the party metaphor, it's the party starts earlier. And I think
Love that part.
And I think one of the challenges we really have on our side on the right is that you have people on the right love to vote on election day, right? I think there's a lot of different reasons, and I think there's an education component to so that you don't, if it's bad weather or something happens, you're not able to vote. And I think the RSLC, the Republican Legislature Committee, is doing a really good job of that, trying to get people to show, hey, you can skip the line, this is the military. And so there's a huge education component into Pennsylvania and what they're doing, and they're spending big dollars effectively. But I also think that it has changed the game in the sense of you now have a huge part of the electorate that maybe when I started were the focus of your final 72-hour program that have already voted. And so you mentioned data earlier, but the ability to pull those people out of your audience, so you're not having to call them or to go to their door to waste an ad spend, is a big part of what our party has done. And it's almost a suppression can now be almost as valuable as a lead, because we're talking about such big numbers and being able to reach people. And I think that's a game changer. Is are you reaching on election day the people that really do need just that final push, and maybe in a state like Pennsylvania the game changer.
So are you seeing that as well, where you're sort of, your GOTV isn't about the final, I remember the 72-hour plans and the war rooms and all of that. Is GOTV now sort of, you're picking off chunks of voters?
well, I think I talked about the persuasion effort and the GOTV effort, and I think the persuasion effort will probably last longer, and the GOTV piece will begin earlier. And Democrats have been strong proponents of early voting and ensuring that more people can participate in elections. So I think you'll continue to see a strong push from the candidates, from the committees, and from outside groups who are encouraging, both from a nonpartisan perspective of encouraging and educating people about their responsibility to vote, and then also from a Democratic perspective, those who want to ensure that people show up for the Harris-Walz ticket and Democrats down the ballot, to ensure they understand how many options and the choice they have to exercise their vote, and not be held back by the constraints of having one day to really show up at the polls.
So that makes a lot of sense. So it's similar tactics, it sounds like. So are you now identifying groups that are likely to vote early and going after them? Then you get the next hardest group, and then how's that going?
I think that Tad made a really good point about being more efficient in how you use your resources going forward, but I wouldn't say that we're limiting who we are reaching out to encourage to vote early. I think as we're engaging voters and moving those away from the persuasion into the motivation, and turning folks out, it's really about ensuring that folks have a plan and they can vote the way that they want to vote, be it having that excitement and enthusiasm of being at the ballot box on election day, or voting early for convenience.
So there's a shorthand that Republican field operatives use, is that, are they a 4 out of 4 or are they a 1 out of 4? And it was, did you vote in 4 of the last 4 elections and you're guaranteed to show up, or are you a 1 out of 4? And I can say that every demographic and every party, no matter every geo, has a bunch of 1 out of 4s, or has a bunch of 0 out of 4s. And so the idea is you're just having that list of who to talk to try to get people who, again, are registered and may likely, if we can get to the polls, can go your way. And it's just getting them to show up, and that's what the...
So you're spending less attention on Camille because she's going to vote, she's been active in politics, she's SMPA, but maybe her classmates who are studying chemistry at Penn, maybe they're harder to reach because they're not as fully engaged. So now, here at GW, we have the Honey Nashman Center, and it's civic engagement, and they do big voter registration and voter turnout push. It's nonpartisan. And they talk about making a plan. So are you voting early, or are you going to drive home and vote?
I will be taking the Amtrak home to Pennsylvania to cast my ballot on Election Day. And I think, one, I wanted to do that because it was my first presidential. I wanted to make it symbolic. But I really admire that people do have that choice of either voting early, voting by mail, voting absentee, voting in person. It really gives freedom for those who are saying, oh, I have to work a double on election day to make that last bit of my rent check. I can't vote on election day, but oh, I see my state has early voting. Let me do that instead. Or oh, let me send it in by mail so it's done. I just don't have to worry about it. I have really admired just how we can have just the freedom in that, and I think that's just so effective in getting those 1 out of 4s to 4 out of 4s. And I'm just really...
Yeah.
Well
Make
said,
sure you go
Camille.
up and down the aisle.
Asking everybody on the Amtrak if they have a plan to vote.
Last persuasion push. When we did the prep call again yesterday, somebody asked if this is your first presidential election, and you said it was, and all of us went, oh, like we remembered, like the first. I was thinking about it on the walk in today. Yeah, there was the church in New Haven, and it was 19, like it was, yeah, and it is. It's exciting, I think, to vote in person, and voting's a habit, so you get into the habit. I want to talk about the different ways. Different kinds of campaigns are turning out votes. So you've obviously got the candidates, right? But you're not working directly with candidates. You're working, there's a firewall between your work and the candidates. There are independent expenditures, there are PACs, there are super PACs, there are all sorts of other groups. What are the mechanics of those groups identifying and turning out voters? How do you avoid the coordination? How do you do it legally, ethically, but also make sure that, that low efficacy Republican actually shows up this time, or that low efficacy Dem shows up this time?
Yeah. So traditionally there had been a very clear sort of, not even just legal lines, but just defined lanes of what a campaign was responsible for and what outside groups. And basically, if you had or if you were on the campaign or coordinating side, you had access to the candidate, which goes back to what we're talking about of who's your best messenger, and it's always going to be the candidate. So it's the events and everything that goes into it, and outside groups were maybe doing more sort of air over the top with marketing. I think what's changed over the last couple of years with some interpretations from the FEC is that super PACs, as long as they're not coordinating, can take over more of that role. So I think whether it be providing the data on the front end and then having that routed back through a third party to then to give that to the campaign, I think you see now super PACs that are funding the bus, that are funding the tour, and the candidate just shows up as a special guest. And so I think it's changed a lot. And I think from a super PAC side, because you don't have the power of the candidate, which is so tough, you have to sort of start picking lanes of this is what my message is going to be, or this is what my shtick is going to be. And I think GOTV is good because usually in persuasion, unfortunately, everything, or fortunately, swings to the negative side. And I do think you're looking at a lot of groups like AFP Action or what the RSLC is doing that's more of a positive message, and also allows the creative and the content to be different. So you're looking at more vibrant colors, or you're looking at sort of a different type of music tone, as opposed to the wall-to-wall ads that your family is probably getting in Pennsylvania. They're probably dark, blue, and sort of more negative.
Is that your experience as well? Is that what?
Yeah, and I do more work on the coordinated side, but in addition to sort of the work that the outside groups are doing to blanket the airwaves, there's a really important role for candidates, for issue advocacy organizations, for the committees to really work to not only do the marketing piece of it, but also do the earned media. So doing interviews, doing debates, doing events. And then the most important piece is that really, the voter-to-voter, person-to-person direct engagement that's happening on the doors, on calls, through text messages, and other means. And so, again, holistically, you're really trying to surround that voter to turn them out. It's interesting to sort of see the two pieces play out together and a date your poor mom. So sorry.
No matter what side you're in, I think the best lesson for all of you is that being in political campaigns, it's how can you stretch a dollar, or how can you know what your budgets are, and it's not something that I thought on day one, was my strength, but it really is, and so even simple things like the amount of money that will be spent on Google, people who sort of the ones before that are Google, who should I vote for? Maybe not on the presidential level, definitely as you go down, definitely on huge things like ballot amendments and stuff like that. And huge money will be spent on election day. And I think, a super PAC kind of carrying that load for the campaign so you can make sure you're capturing those voters or different parts is something to just think about is who's paying for what and how are you getting the most out of your budget on both sides.
It sounds again like it's, we talk about AI in campaigns. The calls I get from the press are you worried about deep fakes? What's AI doing? And it sounds like the real AI tools aren't generative, but rather predictive, right? What can we learn from the data? How can we figure out who's going to vote when, what they'll be responsive to, and when they respond? Because it sounds like, this came up at a campaigns and elections event last spring as well, is that AI makes campaigns bigger, not smaller, because you empower volunteers or advocates or outside groups to have more information and to do more and to contact more voters in more ways. Does that make sense? You're taking intro to political communication with Professor Heinemann. Is all of this making sense? Or is Professor Heinemann going to pull me aside in the hall tomorrow?
Yeah, I definitely agree with the notion that maybe AI does make campaigns larger. We're seeing this unprecedented rise in something we haven't even scratched the surface of. And I believe that with this new frontier, you could say, I feel like there's a lot to worry about, but I feel like this is also a tool, if used correctly, very stressing if used correctly, because we've unfortunately seen it used incorrectly, could be a tool for persuasion for maybe uninformed voters or voters who are interested in AI or who know more about AI than the election or the candidates. So I believe it's a great tool for things like these.
What do you think?
Yeah, look, I think that certainly it cuts both ways. I think every industry is grappling with the rise of AI and what it means for the future and how it's impacting policy decisions. And certainly it could make work more efficient and faster, but there's also misinformation, disinformation that we need to consider. So I think it's something that we need to continue to look at, and certainly, our firm is looking at how it can be responsibly used, but there really is nothing in our industry that replaces that person-to-person contact at the end of the day. And so while it might speed things up or make things more efficient, really that person-to-person connection where you understand what's motivating the voter, that you can speak directly to that, and drive home the urgency and the stakes at play to motivate them to act. I think that's still very driven by folks in this room and other policy and political folks that are engaged in this effort.
It sounds like what you're saying at the top.
Yeah, and I think AI too will be a huge tool to combat the bias. I was in New Hampshire during the primary when the weekend where it was a deep fake about the election day had been moved, but and I think in past years that certainly would have been, and obviously the person was committing a crime, but the amount, because the campaigns were organized, and I think because of AI being able to source stuff, and because they were able to then tap into their networks to correct their record and to have people call their family, no, this isn't true. Like, that's all AI-powered databases that are allowing you to communicate in real time through text messaging and everything else, that I think it'll ultimately help combat any bad actors and ultimately overwhelm them, and to the point of allowing you to have authentic, real conversations that maybe you weren't allowed to have in the past.
It sounds like, and again, it's back to old school politics. So it's authentic, real conversations. I'll call your friends, you'll knock on the door. It's, you going to neighborhoods in Pennsylvania and saying, hey, let's make a plan. So is it, for all the whiz-bang, all the talk, all the studios and everything we're teaching you, it's about neighbors talking to neighbors, family talking to family. That's what it sounds like.
Yeah, and I think we should all remember that each of us is a trusted messenger in our own network. And so really remembering that power that we all have, as we go out in our communities and encourage folks to make a plan to vote and to engage in our democracy.
So are you, I mean, it's weird. I remember my first presidential campaign when I was in DC. It felt weird, right? Because I was used to being surrounded by yard signs and knocking on doors and all the things. And suddenly in DC in October, November of an election year, nothing's going on, right? And as a result, some of my friends go back out to the field, right? I was in Arizona at the end of one of the cycles. Are you going and knocking on doors at the end?
I sure am. Yeah, I've gone out every cycle since I was actually an intern and doing a semester in Washington here at GW.
Very cool.
There's nothing quite like being with the campaign at the end of all that effort to persuade, to then turn that again enthusiasm into action, and to have those conversations with people to help them make their plan to vote, to speak to their concerns. There's really nothing like it in politics, and so my roles have changed and varied over time. But as soon as the air starts to turn and falls here, I'm ready to knock on a door and talk to a voter.
Are you going home to
Yeah, I
Pennsylvania?
mean, I'd encourage all of you to go out. I mean, there's going to be no shortage of options, and if you have class and you're here in DC, then come to one of our offices, because there will be plenty of work that
Well, are you knocking on doors in Pennsylvania?
I'll be running stuff now from here, in the sense of deploying
Okay.
the marketing stuff. But
Do you miss
I'm
it?
gonna be excited. Yeah, I mean, that's how my wife was a deployed Capitol Hill staffer, so I think
Okay.
it's a great way to meet people and be on it. But I think to your point of, it's all about the one-on-one conversations, but it's being able to harness that at scale. And I think, can you do that in a way that allows everybody to tap into their network and create that huge surge? And that's sort of the focus for us on Election Day.
I know you've got classes, and please attend them. But you've knocked on doors. Are you phone banking, or are you going to try to go home to canvass the last weekend?
Yes, I've been doing what I can, text banking, phone banking, doing whatever I can virtually. I do miss knocking on the doors, of course. Like these fine people have said, it's about that person-to-person connection that I really experienced in 2022. I hope I can replicate it. Maybe I can scurry up to Pennsylvania over a weekend. I'm not too busy and do that. But yeah, just doing what I can, virtual, phone banking, text banking.
Okay, because that's what it comes down to.
Yeah.
All right, it's a bit early, but I want to turn it over to the audience because we've got a full house. What questions do you folks have? Right here in front. Who are you?
So, hi, thanks for being here. My name's Charles. So I wanted to ask how much of this influencer canvassing, if you will, comes from a couple hundred influencers with several million followers, credentials, and blue check marks, versus creators, micro creators who might only have a couple thousand followers, reaching 1,000 people per video, but there's just so many of them, and they're always talking about it. Then there's always new content.
What do you think, Meryl? You were coordinating influencers. You worked with influencers. What do you think?
Yes, and in 2020, I was women's media director for the Biden-Harris campaign, and so I was working very closely with the digital team because we wanted to really drive home what was at stake for parents. The president used to often talk about the sandwich generation on the campaign trail, folks who are caring for young children, but also caring for older parents. And so we found an incredible network of influencers, both big and small, folks who had followings of many millions of people, and then folks with smaller followings, but a very, very engaged audience. And we had a program to work directly with them to ensure they had the content and ideas and the plans, so that they could really engage folks with a call to action to get out to vote. So I think, again, like, we're all trusted messengers in our own network. We are all influencers. And so I think it's been a really smart strategic strategy on behalf of the campaigns to, in addition to all of the other tools that we have, really tap into those networks and reach people where they are already consuming and engaging with those individuals online.
Same thing, Ted?
Yeah, certainly both. I mean, I think even if you think of micro-influencers, not necessarily as paid influencers, but just people with networks. And I think, it goes back to what we've talked about, which was authentic content and like people talking to their own networks, they're going to be able to deliver a message better than anything that our firms could put together. And I think one good example I've seen a lot lately is a lot of Republicans want to remove taxes on tips, and so getting that right, it's a very niche message. It's not something you would think about big in a presidential campaign, but getting that message out and then allowing people sort of within the service industry to tell their own story and how much of an impact that would be on their life, right? It's not something you would necessarily see on a broadcast TV ad in Philadelphia, but it's certainly something that may move the needle with somebody to then turn out and vote, and again, it's going to have a huge impact.
So I'm going to put you on the spot. What influencers do you follow?
The first that comes to mind is a famous Twitch streamer named Hassan Piker. He used to be the Young Turks, but now he does Twitch commentary. I probably follow him the most. I probably watch his streams probably once a week or like once every couple of days. I'm trying to think what else. That's probably the main one, honestly. And I do love Kerry Washington. And I think that's it. I think when it comes to influencers, I'm not saying I personally don't need them, but I think it's important to have a diverse array of influencers, whether they're not even just political, maybe just lifestyle or like a dating influencer that you look at a couple times. And I think especially when it comes to like mental health, just getting and just diluting some of this and turning into like this. And so, yeah, that's probably just the one influencer I follow, hopefully to find more niche ones that don't really have that much of a big audience and plug engagement into their content.
So are you, I mean, everybody's an influencer. You've got people who follow you on various platforms. What messages are you putting out?
Yeah, and I definitely agree that everyone is an influencer. Everyone here has the privilege of an amazing education towards democracy, towards voting, and we can use that for our family members, for our friends. And what messages am I sharing out? Just that what I've said earlier, what's at stake at this current time. I've been sharing messages about, as I worked at Emily's List, just about reproductive rights and what's at stake with that. What else have I been doing?
Because when you go home, I bet your friends who, again, are at Penn studying medicine or pre-med are saying, well, you study politics, what's going on, what should I do, right? I mean, you become a source of trusted information for your friends.
Yes,
so
definitely.
you are now the micro-influencer.
In a way, yes.
Yeah.
I didn't think about it that way, but I think you're right.
Yeah.
I think the key part of what makes it a GOTV push instead of just a persuasion beyond the message is the nuts and bolts of, are you telling them to turn out? More importantly, are you driving them to a place where they can look up their polling place or what time the polls open or how to vote early? And I do think that's like the added part that anyone who's running a GOTV campaign is the practicality. And it's mirroring that, capturing attention, mobilizing someone through emotion, but also the show up. This is when your class starts, so make sure you're there.
Yeah, or if your students get an absentee ballots, I know one thing we're pushing at GW is not everybody can get on Amtrak and go be home in a couple of hours. If you're from Colorado or you've got classes on Tuesday, Election Day is off here at GW this year, so people can work the polls or go vote. But the nuts and bolts of it then becomes, again, from the persuasion, your influence is make a plan. It's not just knocking on doors in low-income communities, but it's pushing messages out to your classmates. Who else? Great question. Yeah, please.
I'm so sorry to talk about influencers again, but I really want to. My name is Elise Kawaka. Thank you all for speaking to us today. I was wondering, have you ever experienced an issue with an influencer who has, let's say like a small but very loyal fan base advocating for a party, but being so disliked by a huge other group of people that also follow them like a cult, that it negatively impacts your campaign rather than promotes it?
Yeah, with friends like these, right? Have you all run across that?
Sure. I have not. I'm sure that could happen, but I think that typically when you're engaging with an influencer audience, and I'm happy to take the last example of, we were looking to engage with moms who are active online, who are really focused and driven by the issue of care and the care economy. And so within their networks, they were really seen as trusted validators who were regularly talking to this issue with a lot of authority and a lot of credibility and authenticity. And so, we tended to not run into that because we were so focused on a specific audience. But I think across surrogates, even outside of influencers, you're really thinking as a campaign or as an organization strategically about what voice is going to resonate with the group of people that I'm trying to reach, and that could be, maybe it's the Black community, and you're going to an HBCU, and it probably doesn't make sense to bring someone along that doesn't have an experience or touch point there, but you bring really proud sorority and fraternity, members, and you bring the head of the Congressional Black Caucus, who has been focused, on representing this community and speaking directly to their concerns in Congress. And so, you really think about who am I trying to reach and who is going to be a messenger that resonates with that particular audience, and try to be really strategic and kind of look ahead and think about what kind of criticisms could we potentially see here, and how do we get ahead of them.
Ted, we've all been on campaigns where if it's maybe not a social media influencer, but it's somebody famous who endorses your candidate, and you think I'd really rather you did not do that.
Sure.
How do you, this is a really interesting question. How do you deal with the influencer or the endorsement that you'd really rather not have?
I love that you use the word surrogate instead of influencers. It sounds more operative speech. Yeah. But I think I think unfortunately we live in a time that probably every single person who speaks is going to have somebody that disagrees with them, and so if you start with that understanding that it's still yes, there are people that are going to be turned off by any surrogate or messenger where you are, it goes to what Meryl talks about, which is it's the audience, and so have you drilled down and who are you trying to you're putting together this content, whether it's free and organic or whether you're putting millions of dollars behind it, but it is to reach some sort of specific audience at some point, and so does this person connect and what they're saying connect with that group? And I think that may be the group, right, that moves the needle and allows you to win. And so it doesn't matter as much that somebody who really isn't going to like anything that they say. It's better it's better to just accept it and to just know and say, hey, we're going to go in, because the whole idea is to try to educate and mobilize this small group of people, and that you're only going to maybe get 1 out of 10, but it can be a huge game changer.
Would you ever, if somebody unsolicited came out and said, I endorse, Moreno in Ohio or Lake in Arizona, would you disown that endorsement or influencer? Would you say, no, we don't actually stand with that person?
So, it's a great comms question. I think at that point, do you draw more attention to it? But I think, I certainly think that you have to think through what message you're sending when you're speaking to GOTV. But again, your focus is so different than what, that's why your comms director probably isn't running your GOTV field program, right? It's because it has to be drilling down into a certain segment, and there's going to be risk with that, but the reward is bigger.
Makes sense. Other questions? Yeah.
Hi, I'm Tyler. I guess my question is, how effective do you think people like the Cheneys and Adam Kinzinger endorsing Harris, and then RFK and Tulsi Gabbard endorsing Trump, how effective do you think those types of surrogates are on getting maybe people who've been disgruntled by the craziness of politics over the past couple of years to kind of maybe re-enter the political arena and get out to vote?
What do you think?
So I see a huge divide between people that are in politics or sort of within the bubble, here, versus people that aren't. I think everyone that you named is somebody who served at one point, depending on where they are. And so I don't know how much that changes the game, particularly now with, at least on our side, someone who's been on the ballot now, 3 times. And so I don't know if people within the sort of traditional, because I think what happens is, at least if we're talking about the GOTV audience, tend to tune out, right? Like they're not really excited about politics to begin with. So a former politician telling them what they should do or going isn't going to necessarily resonate as much as maybe somebody from outside with something that they might identify with.
But this was a big part of the DNC, right? It was Republicans
It
coming
was,
out.
yeah, and I think it actually, from the Democratic perspective, did have a big impact. At the DNC, the Republicans for Harris Walls were prominently featured because, they gave created a permission structure really for Democrats and Republicans and for independents to look at the Harris Walls record and the vision they were laying out and decide, be open-minded to it. And so I think that was very helpful, and I think you're going to continue to see, Republican voices lifted up by the campaign to demonstrate that the vision she's putting forward, again, she's educating voters about who she is and her policy plans and the vision she has for the country, really, encourage them to look at it with an open mind and regardless of party, really Republican, Independent, or Democrat, be open-minded to and persuaded to support her.
Does Gabbard do that for Republicans?
I think that's a better question for Todd. I'm not sure how much weight she carries.
Does Tulsi Gabbard draw?
No, I mean, again, I
independents
think
in
it's just because even though like she served a small amount of time, I don't know that politicians do as much. I mean, I'm actually more interested in the fact that coming from West Virginia and sort of the history of the union movement, right? The fact that you have so many union workers that are sort of now up for grabs for Republicans, which never would happen before. I mean, I worked in campaigns where it was the straight ticket voting, and you would literally just hit the button once and it would do everything, right? And that was all being driven by, to your point, people at the top that were making endorsements. People would walk into the voting booth with, here's my union voting card of who I am. And I think that's changed completely on its head. And so I think it's more, but it's not because, the head of the union or the head of politics is like, here's who you need to vote for. It's just how politics have changed.
Does cross-party endorsement affect how you think about a candidate? I mean, you're kind of locked in on the presidential, but on other candidates, would it matter if a Republican came out and said, hey, I'm endorsing this Democrat for state legislature or governor or something down ballot?
Yeah, I believe.
Or what if a Democrat endorsed a Republican the other way around? What if it said, hey, I know you're a Democrat, but as a Democrat, I'm supporting whomever?
How would it affect me? I think with a Democrat maybe endorsing a Republican, I would want, if I had the opportunity, sit down with them and say what made you think about that, what made you endorse that, not out of saying, oh, you're crazy for doing that, but just trying to learn what your thoughts are, what's most important for you in this election, and just trying to learn your thought process through that choice. How would it affect me? I think people are entitled to their own opinions, to their own voting choices. That's what makes our democracy so fluid and great, that people can make their own choices about these things. So I don't think I would get too wrapped up into that. I know it's not the outcome I would have wanted, but who am I to say, oh, you can't do that?
But it's creating the permission structure. It's I'm allowed to have this conversation now. Right. Interesting.
I think it's also going back to GOTV. It's there's more people on the running for office than just the top of the ticket. And I do think everyone that you're turning out, right, it may impact a race differently just because of where they are. I think Pennsylvania is a huge example. I'm really curious to look sort of the day after the election and to find the people who came out to vote for Trump or the vice president on election day, then when it came down to the Casey McCormick Senate race, how did they vote? Did they cross-ticket or did they just skip that race entirely? And I think it'll have a huge, profound, and the number of undervotes is always sort of a underappreciated sort of art in GOTV, but that the effect that turnout is going to have on races up and down the ballot is probably something that keeps us up at night as far as beyond just the top of the ticket that people will be focused on.
Well, there are two parts of this I think are super interesting. One is ticket splitting, which has gone down over the years, but in some places you're seeing really splitting at the top of the ticket, right? Arizona, Trump is up by roughly the same margin that Gallego is up, right? So the Democratic senator and then the Republican presidential candidate. But there's also drop-off, right? Oh, I'm going to stop voting at state legislature or city council. So GOTV can help turnout vote for down ballot races, and you hope that if you're turning out Dems for Harris-Walz, Republicans for Trump-Vance, the Republican local candidate will pick up some of those votes. But there's also the idea that down ballot GOTV can help push the top of the ticket. Right? You may be tired of Harris and Walz and listening to Trump and Vance, but this local city council member is super important. Come out and vote for them. And by the way, while you're in the voting booth, keep going instead of down ballot, up the ballot. Right? Is this are you pushing GOTV? We're used to coattails. Are you also GOTV pushing?
I mean, I think people are talking about. I think people were talking about it a lot, particularly when Biden was still on the ticket, because I think it was time. It's like water, right? It's always going to go downhill, and so I do. But I certainly think that there will be state legislators on both sides who will owe their office to do it, and it's a lot more work. You look at somebody in your neck of the woods, Brian Fitzpatrick. He has to run twice as hard in his Bucks County district because of the makeup of where he is, and so I'm not necessarily sure that sort of down is driving a lot of people. I think, but it may impact a race here or there.
Interesting. Time for one more, I think. One more question? Please, in the back.
My name is Joshua, and I was wondering if you think that the traditional campaigns that are made up of like large 5,000-10,000 person rallies are the most effective use of a candidate's time to maximize the audience that they reach.
That's interesting.
All of you are nodding. That's a very good question.
Yeah,
Thank you so much
that's a
for
good
coming.
question.
That's
I
really.
think it goes back to our comments earlier about just really utilizing every tool at our disposal to demonstrate enthusiasm and then turn that into a GOTV effort where you're turning people out and ensuring that they show up at the polls. So, in some instances, that's one way for a candidate to speak, and Camille said she wants to hear directly from the candidate. It's a great way for a candidate to reach a large group of people in a really critical town, city, district that is going to make or break the way the state goes for the top of the ticket. So I think it's one of many ways that candidates should be, reaching folks, especially, the principals who have much more limited time. But it's not the only way. And you'll see, stops at barbershops, stops in small businesses, surrogates, blanketing the local airwaves of that community. Local influencers that maybe do a video with the candidate themselves or with another trusted messenger in the community. So I think it's one of many ways to reach folks, and for a candidate with limited time, it's one way to reach a lot of folks at once.
And sure, I think you can make the argument that having an event at a barbershop is going to be the same clip on the 6 o'clock news that you're going to get, and so why would you do it? But it's about organizing. It's about data collection, and I think one of the things that President Trump was so successful for is that it's so many people at his rallies. But in the past, that campaigns traditionally didn't know who was at that rally, right? You were so worried about crowd building, you were just outside trying to pull people in, and now both sides have gotten so sophisticated and everything moving online, you're suddenly getting email and phone number from that, right? And so then there's all this follow-up funnel that comes to it, and those people are then reaching into their networks and being little micro-influencers themselves. So look, I worked a lot at rallies. I spent a lot of my time outside the perimeter of rallies, welcoming people. It was not fun work in the heat, and the people are not happy to see you when they're waiting in line to go into the Secret Service mags. But I can tell you, I don't know. I just think there's such a value for it. And the fact is you leave with because you've had 20 minutes or whatever it is with a candidate message, people leave fired up, and that is probably the best weapon that we have in order to go out and mobilize more people. And that because they've ticketed these events and they have all this information, suddenly they're able to do a lot more with it. So it's a huge GOTV tool. But they are costly, and they are a lot of work. So
well, with early voting, I mean, when they're walking out, you're going to vote on the way out. So they're actually voting at the rally. So the enthusiasm, because one thing we know about enthusiasm is that it fades, right? And persuasion messages fade over time. And so it's like it is both a persuasion, energizing, but also GOTV effort all bundled into one.
Absolutely. And it also gives an opportunity to lift up the down ballot candidates who are vying for attention, right? It's an opportunity to let them shine and share their message and encourage folks to turn out for the ticket. So another sort of way to engage those down ballot candidates and give them an opportunity.
Do you like the big rallies? Do you go to rallies? Do you like them?
I do. I unfortunately could not go to the Philadelphia rally that Harris had. I just couldn't swing it in time with work. But a couple months ago during the summer. But as you said, enthusiasm does fade away. When I heard that Harris was going to have a rally in Philadelphia, I entered my phone number, entered my information. It's like, okay, I'm going to get the first to get this email about information. Even though I didn't go, I'm still getting texts. Camille, it's Kamala Harris. Camille, it's Doug Emhoff. Camille, it's Tim Walz. And I was like, oh my gosh. But
Until you realize it was your classmates writing those texts.
yeah, and I think that really pokes at the fires of enthusiasm, making sure that those embers are still there, that it's not, turned into smoke. So as Mariel said, there is so many, that's a good way of reaching so many people, but there's also so many other ways as well.
So it sounds like my lessons from this are, on one hand, it's a yes and,
Yes.
right? Everything is a yes and. But ultimately, for GOTV and for campaigns, it comes down to what all of us grew up doing in campaigns, which is knocking on doors and talking to neighbors. Ultimately, it's people to people, is what it sounds like. So 2024, new tools, more data collection, more options, but, so that's new, but what's fundamentally really old is why we do politics, which is we're talking to people. Thank you so much for our panel. Thank you all of you for coming. Yes, you are allowed to applaud. That is appropriate. We've got another one of these coming up in October. We're going to be talking about digital fundraising after the election, our third one of the fall with campaigns and elections. We'll be looking back on what on earth just happened here and trying to unpack everything. We're also going to be having large public events with Professor Lance Bennett, who all of you are supposed to be reading in Professor Heineman's Intro to Political Communication class, one of America's leading political communication scholars, and a whole lot of other cool stuff happening this fall. Thank you to Jack, thank you to the GWTV team, thank you to the audio team, and thank you as always to Sarah Morissette. We'll see you all in class tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank
We're
you very
good?
much, guys.
Thanks, everybody.